The news breaks at precisely 14:23 Greenwich Mean Time on this cold November afternoon. Within minutes, every major news outlet in Britain carries the same shocking headline. Parliament has convened an emergency session to address what sources are calling the most serious breach of royal protocol in modern history. The scandal involves Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, and the revelations that surfaced just 5 minutes before this parliamentary gathering suggest a level of misconduct that even his harshest critics could not have anticipated. The leaked documents, obtained by multiple media outlets simultaneously, reveal that Harry has been secretly advising a controversial technology firm with ties to foreign governments on matters relating to British data privacy laws. The timing could not be worse. Parliament has spent the past 18 months debating comprehensive digital privacy legislation, and the revelation that a member of the royal family has been privately consulting with entities that stand to gain or lose billions from these decisions has triggered what one senior MP describes as a constitutional earthquake. Inside the House of Commons, the atmosphere crackles with tension rarely witnessed outside of wartime declarations or votes of no confidence. Members from all parties fill the green benches, their faces reflecting varying degrees of shock, anger, and grim determination. The speaker rises, his voice cutting through the murmurs that ripple across the chamber. He announces that the session will address urgent matters of national security and constitutional integrity involving a senior member of the royal family. He does not need to specify which member. Every person in that historic room already knows. The Home Secretary stands to present the evidence, her normally composed demeanor giving way to visible distress. She speaks of communications intercepted by security services during routine monitoring of foreign influence operations. The messages show Harry providing detailed insights into parliamentary thinking, offering predictions about legislative outcomes, and suggesting strategies for corporate lobbying efforts. The content, she reveals, demonstrates either a catastrophic failure to understand his position or a willful disregard for constitutional boundaries that separate Crown from Parliament. In Montecito, California, the morning sun has barely cleared the horizon when Harry's phone begins its relentless assault of notifications. His security team wakes him with news that the situation in London has exploded beyond anything their crisis management protocols had prepared for. Meghan appears in the doorway of their bedroom, her face pale as she scrolls through British news sites on her tablet. They both understand immediately that this is not another tabloid invention or media exaggeration. This is real, documented, and potentially catastrophic. The technology firm at the center of the scandal, DataSphere Global, has been the subject of parliamentary scrutiny for months. The company, registered in the Cayman Islands but operating extensively throughout the Commonwealth, has faced allegations of harvesting British citizens' personal information and selling it to the highest bidders, including authoritarian regimes. That a prince of the realm has been advising this company, even informally, represents a betrayal that transcends political divisions. Labour MPs and Conservative backbenchers who agree on virtually nothing else find common cause in their outrage. Documents show that Harry's involvement began approximately 14 months ago, shortly after he and Meghan signed a lucrative consulting deal with a venture capital firm that holds significant stakes in DataSphere Global. The arrangement, marketed as Harry providing expertise on mental health applications and ethical technology development, apparently evolved into something far more substantive. Email chains reveal Harry discussing specific parliamentary committees, naming MPs likely to support or oppose certain amendments, and offering assessments of how the palace might respond to various regulatory scenarios. The palace receives notification of the parliamentary emergency session through official channels, giving Buckingham Palace staff approximately 30 minutes to formulate a response before the media deluge begins. The King's private secretary immediately convenes the most senior advisors, but the options before them are limited and universally unpalatable. King Charles, informed while preparing for a scheduled engagement at a children's hospital, cancels his entire afternoon schedule. Aides who witnessed his reaction describe a man visibly shaken, struggling to reconcile his role as sovereign with his instincts as a father. Back in Westminster, a Conservative MP known for his staunch defense of monarchy rises to speak, and his words carry the weight of betrayal. He recounts Harry's military service, his charitable work, his apparent dedication to public service, and then contrasts these achievements with the evidence now before Parliament. How, he asks, does a prince who served in Afghanistan, who founded the Invictus Games for wounded veterans, who spoke so movingly about duty and service, end up selling access and insight to corporate interests that actively undermine British sovereignty? The question hangs in the chamber like an indictment. The Labour opposition seizes the moment to call for sweeping reforms to how the royal family operates and is held accountable. Their shadow minister for digital affairs delivers a blistering speech arguing that this scandal proves the monarchy operates with insufficient oversight. If a non-working royal can engage in what she terms corporate espionage without detection until security services accidentally uncover it, what other activities might be occurring beyond public scrutiny? She demands the creation of a Royal Activities Oversight Board with statutory powers to investigate and punish misconduct. Prince William, informed of the crisis while undertaking engagements in Scotland, cuts short his visit and returns immediately to London. Sources close to the Prince of Wales report that his reaction combines fury at his brother's actions with deep concern for the institutional damage. William has spent years carefully rebuilding public trust in the monarchy, following various scandals, and he views Harry's behavior as sabotaging that painstaking work. The flight back to London gives him 2 hours to compose himself, but those who meet him upon arrival describe barely controlled rage. The financial markets react with surprising volatility to the news. DataSphere Global's stock price plummets 23% in the first hour of trading following the revelations, as investors flee what now appears to be a company entangled in a royal scandal with potential legal ramifications. Meanwhile, shares in British technology firms, subject to the pending privacy legislation, surge on speculation that the scandal might delay or derail reforms that would impact their business models. The intersection of royal drama and market dynamics creates a feedback loop that amplifies the crisis's impact. As the parliamentary session enters its second hour, additional evidence emerges that deepens the crisis beyond what anyone initially imagined. The Home Secretary presents phone records showing that Harry participated in at least 16 conference calls with DataSphere executives and their legal team over the past year. The calls, lasting anywhere from 20 minutes to over 2 hours, occurred at times that suspiciously correlated with key parliamentary debates and committee hearings on digital privacy legislation. More damaging still are transcripts of 3 calls that were recorded by foreign intelligence services monitoring DataSphere's international communications. Britain's Signals Intelligence Agency, Government Communications Headquarters, obtained these recordings through intelligence sharing agreements and flagged them for ministerial review just 48 hours ago. In one particularly egregious excerpt, Harry can be heard advising DataSphere executives that a certain Labour MP, known for her aggressive questioning of tech companies, is unlikely to have the votes to pass a specific amendment. He suggests they focus their lobbying efforts elsewhere, toward more persuadable members. The revelation that foreign intelligence services possess recordings of a British prince discussing parliamentary matters sends fresh shockwaves through Westminster. The security implications alone justify the emergency session, but the constitutional crisis runs deeper. Members of Parliament, regardless of party affiliation, understand that they have been potentially compromised by someone who, by birth and title, occupies a unique position in the British state. The sense of betrayal is palpable, transforming the chamber's usual partisan theatrics into something approaching unified outrage. Parliamentary authorities immediately launch an internal investigation to determine whether Harry had access to privileged information beyond what is publicly available. Several MPs acknowledge having encountered Harry at charity events and social functions over the years when he still undertook royal duties. The question arises, did Harry use these social connections to gather intelligence that he then passed to corporate interests? If so, the breach extends beyond constitutional impropriety into potential criminal territory. Conversations with the Crown Prosecution Service begin before the parliamentary session even concludes. In California, Harry's legal team assembles an emergency response that borders on panic. Lawyers specializing in international law, corporate regulation, royal protocol, and criminal defense join conference calls that stretch through the morning and into the afternoon. The consensus among these highly paid experts is grim. Harry's position is legally precarious and politically indefensible. The best-case scenario involves significant financial penalties, permanent removal from any remaining royal roles, and years of legal battles. The worst-case scenario includes criminal prosecution under laws governing official secrets and corruption. Meghan, despite her own fraught relationship with British media and institutions, recognizes the gravity of the situation in ways that perhaps Harry has been slow to grasp. She understood when they left Britain that certain doors would close, certain privileges would end, but she assumed they retained the freedom to pursue commercial opportunities like any private citizens. The realization that Harry's royal status creates ongoing obligations and restrictions, even in exile, even after stepping back from duties, crystallizes in this moment. She begins making calls to American legal experts, seeking perspectives outside the British establishment's groupthink. The palace issues its first statement 3 hours into the parliamentary session. The carefully worded release, approved by the king himself, expresses deep concern at the allegations and commits to full cooperation with any official investigations. Crucially, it does not defend Harry or suggest the allegations are false. The statement's clinical tone, devoid of the warm, familial language that usually characterizes royal communications about family members, signals to those who read such things carefully that the institution has made its choice. The monarchy will protect itself, even at Harry's expense. King Charles attempts to reach his son by phone, but Harry does not answer. Whether this represents an inability to take the call while managing his own crisis, or a deliberate avoidance of a conversation he knows will be painful, remains unclear. The king leaves no voicemail, understanding that anything he says might eventually become public. Instead, he sends a brief text message, 3 words that his private secretary later describes as devastatingly simple. "What were you thinking?" The message is delivered without response. Prince William releases his own statement through Kensington Palace, separate from the official palace response. His words carry personal anguish wrapped in institutional duty. He speaks of the importance of public service, the responsibility that comes with royal status, and the necessity of maintaining public trust. He does not mention Harry by name, but the implication is unmistakable. William positions himself as representing the future of the monarchy, a future built on transparency, accountability, and unwavering commitment to constitutional principles. The statement reads like a divorce announcement between brothers. As evening approaches in London, the parliamentary debate shifts from shock and outrage toward concrete action. A formal motion takes shape, drafted collaboratively by senior MPs from multiple parties. The motion calls for the immediate and permanent removal of Harry from all remaining royal positions, including his Counselor of State status. It demands that he be prohibited from using his ducal title in any commercial or professional capacity. It requests that the king consider more formal actions, language that some interpret as a veiled reference to stripping Harry of his peerage entirely. The constitutional scholars called to advise Parliament work through precedents dating back centuries, searching for guidance on how to address a scandal without clear historical parallel. The closest comparison, they conclude, is the Duke of Windsor after his abdication, but even that situation differs significantly. Edward VIII abdicated to Mary, then lived in effective exile, carefully monitored but generally keeping to himself. Harry has not abdicated anything, has not broken formal laws in the traditional sense, but has violated something perhaps more fundamental: the unwritten understanding that royal status, even for non-working royals, carries inescapable obligations and constraints. The revelation of Harry's corporate consulting activities hits Catherine, Princess of Wales, with particular force. She has privately maintained hope that time and distance might heal the family breach, that her children might grow up knowing their uncle despite the current difficulties. Catherine, known for her careful approach to family matters and her ability to see multiple perspectives, finds herself unable to construct a defense for Harry's actions. During a private conversation with William that evening, she speaks of feeling foolish for her optimism, for believing that common sense and family loyalty would prevent this kind of disaster. The Queen Consort, Camilla, offers her own perspective shaped by decades of navigating royal complexities. She reminds Charles that the institution has survived worse crises and will survive this one, but survival requires decisive action untainted by sentiment. Camilla has never enjoyed a close relationship with Harry, and the current scandal confirms her long-standing suspicion that he lacks the judgment necessary for any role touching constitutional matters. Her advice to her husband is blunt: protect the crown first, grieve for your son second, and never confuse the order of those priorities. Princess Anne, the king's sister and perhaps the most pragmatic member of the royal family, issues no public statement, but makes her views known within family circles. She describes Harry's behavior as a predictable result of allowing him to retain royal status while pursuing commercial interests. Anne has spent her entire life in service to the crown, undertaking hundreds of engagements annually with minimal staff and no drama. She views Harry's path as a cautionary tale about what happens when duty becomes optional and royal privilege is treated as a personal asset to be monetized. The question of Harry's finances becomes a subject of intense media scrutiny. Investigative journalists begin piecing together the Sussexes' income sources, their business arrangements, their consultancy agreements. The picture that emerges shows a couple leveraging their royal connections far more aggressively than previously understood. Beyond the data sphere arrangement, reporters uncover advisory roles with multiple corporations, speaking fees that reach six figures for virtual appearances, and equity stakes in companies that regularly interact with governments throughout the Commonwealth. Each revelation adds weight to the argument that Harry has been systematically exploiting his royal status for commercial gain. Parliament's debate enters its 8th hour as members begin voting on preliminary measures. The first vote addresses whether to request formal removal of Harry's Counselor of State status. The result is overwhelming: 412 in favor, 73 against, with 55 abstentions. The margin stuns even those who expected a comfortable majority. It represents a cross-party consensus rarely seen in the modern era, a unified rejection of Harry's conduct that transcends normal political divisions. The vote's lopsidedness sends an unmistakable message. This is not a partisan issue, but a constitutional imperative. In Montecito, dawn breaks on what Harry and Meghan now understand is the worst day of their post-royal life. Their daughter, too young to understand, plays in the garden while her parents make frantic calls to lawyers, advisors, and the few remaining allies they can trust. Harry drafts statement after statement, each one rejected by his legal team as either too defensive, too aggressive, too apologetic, or too defiant. The right tone proves impossible to find because no tone can adequately address the fundamental problem. The evidence is damning, his actions indefensible, and his judgment catastrophically flawed. Meghan's attempts to contact certain members of the royal family go unanswered. She tries Catherine first, hoping that a woman-to-woman appeal might open a channel of communication, but the call goes to voicemail. She tries Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, with whom she once enjoyed cordial relations, but receives a text response saying only that this is not a good time. The silence from the palace is deafening and deliberate. The family has circled the wagons, and Harry and Meghan find themselves definitively outside the perimeter. The media firestorm reaches unprecedented intensity as evening news broadcasts across Britain lead with the parliamentary action. The BBC devotes an hour-long special to analyzing the crisis, featuring constitutional experts, former royal correspondents, and political analysts. The consensus among these commentators is that Harry has crossed a line from which there is no return. Even those sympathetic to his desire for independence and critical of how he and Meghan were treated by British tabloids acknowledge that providing political intelligence to corporate interests represents an unconscionable abuse of his position. Buckingham Palace convenes a second emergency meeting to discuss next steps. The king must decide whether to wait for Parliament to formally request action or to preemptively remove Harry from remaining positions and titles. The advantage of waiting is that it allows Parliament to take the lead, insulating the monarch from accusations of being vindictive toward his own son. The disadvantage is that delay makes the king appear weak or indecisive. After 2 hours of debate among his closest advisors, Charles makes his choice. He will act first, swiftly and definitively, demonstrating that the monarchy polices itself and requires no parliamentary prod to maintain standards. The official announcement comes at 2200 hours London time, released simultaneously to all major media outlets. King Charles, exercising his constitutional authority, issues letters patent removing Prince Harry from his remaining ceremonial positions. The Duke of Sussex is immediately stripped of his Councillor of State status, effective without delay. Furthermore, the king requests that Harry cease using his ducal title in any professional or commercial context, though the title itself cannot be removed without parliamentary legislation. The statement, formal and uncompromising, marks the most severe action taken against a senior royal family member in living memory. The decree includes language addressing the specific misconduct that triggered the crisis. It references Harry's engagement in commercial activities incompatible with the dignity and constitutional role of the crown, and his failure to maintain appropriate boundaries between royal status and private interests. The phrasing, drafted by the most senior constitutional lawyers in the kingdom, creates a legal and historical record that will define Harry's legacy. The king signs the document in his own hand, a signature that represents both sovereign authority and paternal heartbreak. Prince William receives advance notice of his father's decision and offers his full support. In a private communication to the king, William writes that while the action is painful for the family, it is necessary for the institution. He acknowledges that his relationship with his brother may never recover, but argues that some principles transcend familial bonds. William's endorsement carries weight, not just as the heir's approval, but as a generational statement about what the future monarchy will tolerate. Under William's eventual reign, the message suggests there will be no tolerance for exploitation of royal status. The public reaction divides sharply along predictable lines, but with some surprising crosscurrents. Traditional monarchists applaud the king's decisiveness, viewing it as an essential defense of constitutional principles. Republicans use the scandal to argue that the monarchy's very existence creates these conflicts and that Britain should move toward an elected head of state. But a significant portion of the public, particularly younger Britons, expresses sympathy for Harry while condemning his actions. They view him as a victim of an impossible situation, someone who wanted to be both independent and royal, and discovered too late that the two aspirations are mutually exclusive. In California, Harry receives news of his father's decree through his lawyers rather than from the king directly. The absence of personal communication, the purely formal nature of the severance, wounds him more deeply than the actual removal of positions he never expected to fill. Harry understands, perhaps for the first time, that he has not simply disappointed his family or embarrassed the institution. He has fundamentally altered his relationship with the crown in ways that cannot be repaired through apologies or the passage of time. Meghan's response to the decree mixes vindication with devastation. Part of her has always believed that the royal family would eventually reject them completely, and the king's action confirms that suspicion. But another part hoped that some connection could be maintained, that their children could grow up with ties to their British heritage and royal cousins. The decree, in its finality, closes doors that she had wanted to leave at least partially open. She holds Harry as he processes the reality that his father has chosen the crown over their relationship. The DataSphere scandal continues to develop as investigators dig deeper into the company's operations and Harry's involvement. New evidence emerges showing that the initial consulting arrangement was structured to obscure Harry's participation, routed through multiple intermediary entities and advisory boards. The complexity of the arrangement suggests sophisticated legal and financial planning designed to maintain plausible deniability. These revelations undermine any defense based on naivety or accidental impropriety. The setup appears deliberate, calculated to exploit Harry's access while providing legal cover. Parliament receives the King's decree with relief and approval. The Home Secretary rises to commend the monarch's swift action, and to note that it demonstrates the monarchy's capacity for self-regulation. However, she also announces that parliamentary inquiries will continue, as questions remain about how such arrangements could develop without earlier detection. Several MPs call for new legislation creating formal oversight mechanisms for all individuals in the line of succession, working royals or not. The scandal, they argue, exposes gaps in the exist. The Crown Prosecution Service begins its own assessment of whether criminal charges are warranted. Specialists in corruption law examine whether Harry's actions constitute misconduct in public office, a common law offense that applies even to those without formal government positions if they hold positions of public trust. The analysis focuses on whether Harry used information or access gained through his royal status for personal financial benefit. If prosecutors conclude the evidence supports charges, Harry could face the unprecedented situation of being criminally prosecuted despite his royal lineage. As the week progresses, additional consequences cascade through Harry and Meghan's professional life. Two major corporations terminate consulting agreements, citing reputational concerns. A streaming service places their documentary projects under review, worried about association with scandal. Publishers express concern about the viability of Meghan's planned memoir, questioning whether public appetite for Sussex perspectives has shifted from curiosity to fatigue. The financial implications mount quickly, threatening the income streams the couple has built to sustain their California lifestyle. 3 weeks after the scandal broke, the situation has settled into a grim new reality. Harry has issued a formal apology, released through his legal team, acknowledging serious errors in judgment. The statement accepts responsibility without making excuses, admits to failing to appreciate constitutional obligations, and expresses regret for embarrassing his family and country. The apology, while well-crafted, arrives too late to alter the consequences already set in motion. Public polling shows minimal movement in Harry's favorability ratings, which have plummeted to their lowest levels ever recorded. Parliament's promised inquiry into royal oversight begins taking evidence from constitutional experts and former palace officials. The testimony reveals a system that relies heavily on trust and tradition rather than formal enforcement mechanisms. Witnesses describe how working royals receive extensive briefings on constitutional boundaries, but non-working royals like Harry fall into a gray area. They retain royal status and titles, but receive no ongoing guidance or monitoring. The inquiry's interim report recommends creating an independent Royal Standards Authority with powers to investigate complaints and impose sanctions, short of criminal prosecution. The king faces the most challenging period of his reign, balancing institutional responsibilities with personal grief. Those close to Charles report that he has aged visibly in the weeks since the scandal broke, that the toll of severing ties with his younger son weighs heavily. He maintains his schedule of public engagements, displaying the stoicism that defines his approach to duty, but in private moments allows himself the sadness that public position forbids. Charles has spent his life preparing to be king, but nothing prepared him for wielding royal authority against his own child. Prince William and Catherine maintain their distance from the scandal's ongoing fallout, focusing on their own duties and their children's well-being. William has spoken privately with trusted advisors about how to explain Uncle Harry's situation to his children as they grow older and begin understanding their family's complexities. The conversation William anticipates having someday with Prince George about duty, responsibility, and the consequences of failing to honor royal obligations weighs on him. Harry's downfall becomes a teaching moment, though not one William ever wanted to deliver. Harry and Meghan's life in Montecito continues, but with the shadow of scandal now permanently attached to their public image. They withdraw from certain social circles, decline invitations to events where their presence might create awkwardness, and focus on the charitable work they believe still has value regardless of reputational damage. The Invictus Games organization makes clear that Harry's role continues unchanged, that his service to wounded veterans transcends political controversy. This loyalty from the veterans community provides one source of solace amid the broader rejection. The financial investigation into Datasphere Global expands beyond Harry's involvement to examine the company's entire business model and political influence operations. Regulators in multiple jurisdictions open proceedings that could result in massive fines and potential criminal charges against executives. The scandal that began with Harry's consultancy work has metastasized into a comprehensive examination of how technology companies exploit regulatory processes. Harry's role, while triggering the scrutiny, becomes just one thread in a much larger tapestry of corporate misconduct. Reconciliation between Harry and his family appears increasingly unlikely as months pass without substantive communication. Charles sends occasional brief messages through intermediaries, birthday wishes for his grandchildren, and similarly neutral gestures, but no meaningful dialogue develops. William maintains complete silence, having apparently decided that his brother's betrayal places him beyond forgiveness. The gulf between California and London grows wider, not just in miles, but in mutual understanding and trust that, once shattered, proves nearly impossible to rebuild. The question of Harry's long-term status remains partially unresolved. He retains his position in the line of succession, as removing him would require parliamentary legislation that the government has shown no appetite to pursue. He technically remains the Duke of Sussex, though he has agreed not to use the title commercially. This liminal state, neither fully royal nor entirely private citizen, creates ongoing ambiguity that satisfies no one. Harry exists in permanent exile, belonging fully to neither world, accepted completely by neither side. Public opinion gradually shifts from acute scandal to chronic disappointment. The initial shock gives way to a weary recognition that Harry represents a cautionary tale about the impossibility of having things both ways. Commentators draw lessons about duty and privilege, about the social contract that underlies constitutional monarchy, about the price of wanting freedom without surrendering status. The sympathetic note that Harry and Meghan sought what millions take for granted, the right to pursue their own interests and make their own choices, but that their unique position made those ordinary freedoms extraordinary impossibilities. The monarchy itself emerges from the crisis diminished but functional. The king's decisive action, while painful, demonstrated that the institution can police its own members and maintain standards despite familial complications. Parliament's inquiry produces recommendations that modernize oversight without fundamentally altering the constitutional settlement. The public, after months of saturation coverage, grows tired of royal drama and refocuses on more immediate concerns of economic uncertainty and political instability. The Windsor family's soap opera, while entertaining and historically significant, cannot command infinite attention. Harry approaches his 40th birthday facing a future radically different from anything he imagined during his years of royal service. The prince who once enjoyed unprecedented popularity, who brought modern informality to royal duties, who used his platform to advance mental health awareness and veterans' causes, now carries the permanent stain of constitutional scandal. Whether he can rebuild credibility, whether his charitable work can eventually overcome the datasphere debacle, whether time will soften judgments that seem harsh in their finality, all remain open questions without clear answers. The last communication between Harry and his father comes 6 months after the king's decree. Charles sends a handwritten letter, delivered through diplomatic channels to ensure privacy. The contents remain confidential, but sources suggest the king expressed enduring love while maintaining that reconciliation requires acceptance of consequences and respect for constitutional boundaries. Harry's response, if any, never becomes public. The two men, father and son, king and prince, exist in separate worlds that occasionally intersect in memory, but rarely in present reality. The scandal that erupted 5 minutes before Parliament convened has permanently altered the British monarchy's landscape. Harry's fall from grace serves as a stark reminder that royal status carries inescapable responsibilities that survive even explicit rejection of royal duties. Subscribe for continuing coverage of this developing story and its lasting impact.